Hey friends, my name is Father Matt O'Donnell, and I welcome you into the sanctuary here at St. Columbanus Church in Chicago. Over these last weeks, our parish has been engaged in a sermon series on radical hospitality. We've been focused together on what it means for us to be growing as a community of radical hospitality. We've been reminded over and over again that this isn't something that's just for a select few or for a committee or a group within the parish. But as disciples of Jesus, all of us share in this sacred responsibility, this holy work of becoming a people of radical hospitality. We've been invited to encounter, to accompany, and to witness. These three verbs that we've been focusing on for the last 6 weeks. What it means for us to have these unexpected meetings with Jesus. How we are called to walk with one another, to be committed to one another in this life of discipleship, and how we are always called to be the ones who bear witness, who share the good news of Jesus Christ in our world. As we find ourselves still in the midst of a pandemic, as we recognize everything that's happening in our country, while we understand the financial strain that many families are facing across the United States and in fact around the world, as we watch what's happening in Kenosha, Wisconsin, as another African-American man is the victim of police brutality, as we hear about the pain from so many families right here in our own community of living in this difficult moment in our history, I think that there's a question for us as a people who are trying to grow in radical hospitality. So if we do the hard work of welcoming people and accepting people for who they are, if we're making the commitment, if we're going to be intentional about walking with one another, especially those who God calls to be in our community, if we're always willing to give witness to the power of God to do the impossible in our world, I think we have to wrestle with this question of how do we give hope? How do we share hope in this particular moment? Friends, I think that's an important question for us as we continue to grow as a community of radical hospitality. That if we want to be a place, and if we want to be a people, if we want to be a community that is truly willing to welcome whoever it is that God places in our midst, I think we have to be able to convey to people a sense of Christian hope. In Psalm 130 and verse 5, it says, "I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I hope." I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I hope. The words of the psalmist, I believe, are probably where a lot of people, myself included, find ourselves in this particular moment. As we face uncertainties, as we are filled with fears and anxieties, as we have all sorts of questions within us about when things are going to begin to change in our world and in our own lives, we find ourselves waiting. We find ourselves in a space of waiting. For us as people of faith, we know that we don't just sit idly by. We're not passive in this moment, but our soul waits for the Lord. That as we wait, we're called to trust in the Word of God. We're called to trust in this Word of God that tells us that God promises to always be with us. That God is the one who desires to come and dwell among us, God's people. That God is the one that has all power to do anything in the face of this earth except fail. That God is the one who's able to do the impossible. It's waiting on the Lord that I believe gives us hope. Last Wednesday, as I was driving back here to the parish on 71st Street, I had an experience that I haven't really had in quite some time. As I was headed back to the parish on 71st, I saw a car stopped in the middle of the street. And as I looked to my right, I noticed that there was a young man on a bike, and I realized that the car and this young person were arguing back and forth. As I approached and pulled up basically next to that car, I looked to my right and I saw that the young man pulled a gun. So as I was sitting there next to the car, as I was about to pass him, as I looked to my right, I saw the gun pointed at my face. And luckily, I'm fine, and luckily that young person didn't choose to pull that trigger. But I've been thinking about that experience all week and realizing how many people right here in our own community of Park Manor find themselves in situations like that. I've had conversations with many parishioners over the years who found themselves in a moment of great fear. I think about our food pantry on Wednesdays and the stories that I get to hear as I talk to our guests that come to our food pantry each week. I hear the struggles of grandparents who are taking on this burden of trying to provide for their families at a time when they themselves don't feel that they have enough. I hear the worry in the voices of so many parents who are preparing to send students back to college or into high schools or into grammar schools. Just the concerns that they have about their child's safety. There's so many things that you and I face on a day-to-day basis that cause us to waver in our hope. That while we find ourselves in a space of waiting, I think it's almost natural that sometimes we find ourselves wrestling with this question of how much longer are we going to have to wait for things to change. Friends, I think this is why we've been committed together to growing as a community of radical hospitality. Because if we are called to be imitators and followers of Jesus, if we know that in Jesus' own ministry and mission, he was a person of radical hospitality, if we recognize all of the times that Jesus showed up in the most unlikely of places to engage with the most unlikely of characters, we're reminded of what our mission truly is. See, we come to the altar for worship week after week so that we can be nourished and strengthened, so that we can be filled again with this great hope and promise that there is a God who continues to make God's self known not only in our lives but in the life of this world. And then from this sacred table, we carry who we receive into the brokenness of this world. See, I find my hope in the moments of waiting, of resting, of being at peace in the Lord. The question for us this week is, where do you find your hope? Where do you find hope in the midst of so much that seems so overwhelming? For me this past week, my hope has been found in the faces of our scholars at Augustus Tolton Catholic Academy. My hope's been found in teachers and staff who have been here and continue to give to make sure that we form scholars and saints. My hope's in the face of every volunteer who volunteers at our food pantry, who's committed to making sure that we as a parish end food insecurity in our neighborhood. My hope is found every Sunday when we gather together as a community of faith right here in our sanctuary to praise our God. And so my question to you this week is, where do you find hope? Because when you find the answer to that question, then you will be able to bear witness in our worlds to the hope that we find in Jesus. God bless you.